Good morning. Today is Tuesday, October 1st, 2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. There are six board members present. Mr. Greg is not with us today. 6 cases on the agenda. The first case is RPC 3402022 at 1801 Crystal Drive. That's been asked to be withdrawn. I assume, Ms. Ruskin, there's no objection from the county?
No objection.
Okay, so that is withdrawn. I will make a motion to accept that withdrawn. Do I have a second? Mr. Lawson is a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous, 6-0. That case is withdrawn. The next case on the agenda, do we have Mr. Peralta and then also Mr. Harmon? You turn your camera on. There we go. Next case on the agenda is RPC 160330004 at 1515 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, good morning. So this property is a 126,000 square foot office located in Roslyn. It was built in 1970. Now, today I want to discuss the county's review of this case that's presented on their test page. Primarily, I want to focus on what the actual vacancy was at the property as of the date of value, because on the county's review, they can contend that one space is actually occupied and leased. That is, I will present evidence, ample evidence that that is not the case. This third floor space has been vacant since 2022. Now, this was a new issue that was arose on the county's review. We were not aware of it until we received their review. A departmental hearing was not afforded to us. This issue could have easily been resolved outside of today's board hearing. We do have a termination letter from this tenant that they contend is in this space that could have been provided to the county. This could have been resolved. But again, this is the third floor space at the property. The actual status of it as of the date of value, January 1st, 2024, was it vacant and available as the owner has stated on their rent roll for the past 2 years? Or was it actually leased as the DREA contends based on the owners? They actually went back to the 12/31/2021 rent roll to find support for this. So the 12/31/2021 rent roll showed this tenant in the third floor space, their lease going through February of 2025. That tenant moved to another one of the owner's properties in the middle of 2022. So upon moving, the tenant no longer appeared on this property's rent rolls, and it began to appear on the other property's rent rolls. They moved to 1000 Wilson. It's one of the twin towers right down the road. So appeared on the 12/31/2021 rent roll, did not appear on the 12/31/2022 or 12/31/2023 rent rolls. The county's contention is they are still leasing space. Again, we do have a termination agreement that was signed between the tenant and the owner that terminated their lease at this property in July of 2022. Again, we didn't know about this contention of the county's until we received the case. That could have been provided had it been known that this was an issue. Looking at the BOE memo, you can see what new issues were on, what the issues were on appeal and what the county did on review. So again, looking at this third floor space, that third floor tenant back in 2021, middle of 2022, was Summit Ridge Energy. They leased 8,074 square feet on the third floor of this property. Again, this tenant moved to 1000 Wilson Boulevard. It's another property owned by the same owner. There was no termination fee associated with that. They simply allowed them to leave this building, move to 1000 Wilson Boulevard. That termination agreement was effective for this property as of July 2022. So as of the date of value for tax year 2024, that tenant had not been leasing any space for a year and a half. So that space was vacant. It's listed as available on CoStar. The most recent 2 rent rolls, 12/31/2023, 12/31/2022, both show this suite as vacant. Mr. Peralta and I inspected this property August 18th of last year. We both observed this third floor space as vacant. We were told the space was vacant. We took photos of this space as being vacant. So, The CoStar reports next also show the space is vacant and available. That's the 12/31/23 CoStar report, as well as the 12/31/22 CoStar report. The county, if they wanted to look for this tenant, they could have found them with an easy Google search. So I searched Google for Summit Ridge Energy. Their address comes up as 1000 Wilson. You then go to 1000 Wilson and say, what has the owner filed as a rent roll for that property? Well, you look at the past two INEs for 1000 Wilson, that owner has listed this tenant as occupying space at that property. So, there's simply no evidence that this tenant was leasing space at this property. They had a signed termination agreement effective July of 2022. They moved to 1000 Wilson. They were recorded on the INE rent rolls for the past 2 years at 1000 Wilson. So it's simply a stretch to base your analysis on going back 3 years worth of rent rolls and saying, no, we actually think this tenant's still in the building. So how does this affect the county's review? This changes both the county's reconstructed 2023 column and the county's test column. Now, we tried to provide updated sheets for this since, our analysis was done back in April. The county's analysis was done in September. They changed the arguments, came up with this new contention that a tenant who vacated 18 months prior to the date of value was actually in there. Hopefully I can explain it well enough to make it make sense, but using actual income, if we look at the 2023 reconstructed column, using the actual income as the county's done, our estimate of vacant space income as the county's done, the actual concessions, which the county omitted, the guideline vacancy rate, the actual 2023 expenses, and the county's cap rate, it gets us to a value of $30,933,100. This is what operating year 2023 would look like if we added in our rent estimate for the vacant space as the county does on that. Now, this is the same methodology the county uses on their test page, but this changes it because it considers actual concessions. The county does not. They take actual income, actual expenses, just kind of skip over actual concessions. It also updates that vacancy rate to get to the correct vacancy rate. As I spent many minutes addressing, that tenant was gone as of July of 2022. Now, looking at the county's test, column F on the county's test page, if we only correct that vacancy rate to reflect the actual vacancy at the property, we see the assessments reduced to $36,152,000. Now, this is higher than the 2023 reconstructed because it does not account for concessions at the property. Concessions at the property in 2023 were $529,000, yet the county test only allows for $216,000 in concessions. Additionally, concessions at this property last year were $529,000, but if we look at the 4-year average, over the past 4 years, concessions have averaged $824,000 per year. This was not accounted for in the county's test. Only 26% of that 4-year average concession was included on the county's test column. If we impute that average, it gets the county's test column down to $28,765,300. This again compares to the corrected reconstructed value based on correcting that vacancy rate of $30,933,000. So we have 3 different values to work with here. Primary issues are third floor space is vacant and is available, and then concessions. Concessions were not considered by the county. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning. For this case, the primary contention that Mr. Harmon was pointing to was Summit Ridge. As I pointed out in my case, I looked at several INEs to suggest that possibly they were still in this paying for the space. As you recall, Mr. Harmon's 8 minutes in the 2021 INE, it lists the owner as having a lease until 2025. And that was an extension actually that grew their space from 1 year to the next. You'll see on page 30 and 41 of the appellant's supporting documents, that the space grew from 5,704 square feet to 8,074 square feet. And in addition to that, the INE asks the specific questions every year, whether a tenant is leaving from the property or not, and nothing was indicated in those INEs in prior years. Now, if this termination letter is signed and is available, then the county is actually saying that the original assessment is what should be confirmed, which has the 13% vacancy allotted for this Summit Ridge property, in which we depicted exactly 10,255 square feet vacant. In addition to that, the county's original assessment projects a NOI less than what the projected NOI should be given the vacant space income. The appellant contests that despite the actual income being reported in column E at 2.7 million, that the income should be less than the income attributable to that vacant square feet. So if you compare columns E to G2, row 19, they're actually projecting an NOI less than the actual income reported without the vacant square footage income included. So in the department's test, we do actually use a figure that is less than what the projected E1 column row 19 NOI would be. We projected a reconstructed NOI of 3.3. We're testing at 3.2, and the appellant believes 2.6 is justified for this property. As you see in prior years in columns A and C, that the projected NOI that was reported for those 2 years far exceed what the original assessment has projected. And in addition to that, less than what the DRIA's test is projecting as well. So, if there is a question about, the vacant square footage and things of that nature, again, the original assessment is at 13%. We are projecting a lower NOI, and the county, just went extensively back into the prior years to suggest that, perhaps there is, something to be said about the lease that was in place and extended to 2025. Now, the test actually affords the 8%, given that, that Summit Ridge was not included as vacant. But if we were to include it as vacant and deduct the 13%, we would have to readjust our incomes to match what was projected for the 2023 INE. So if we were to deduct 13% vacancy in our test, then we'd have to add some income to adjust for what the property should achieve with the vacant square footage. So with that, we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
Thank you. Excuse me. As has happened before, this and other appellants have talked about adjusting EGI for concessions. I like once again to hear the department's response to the appellant's allegation that concessions aren't considered in the overall income portion of the INE.
The concessions are considered. When you look at all the new leases, it's not 100% that each tenant will receive concessions. Now, in other cases, I did see that in lieu of concessions, they reduced the rate per square foot rate for the tenant. So it's all included in the rate. And then in addition to that, we do see that the concessions are reported all up front in a lump sum manner, and it should be spread out over the course of the entire lease. So if you were to average the current concessions at 529 for 10 over a 10-year lease, that's only 52,000 or so dollars per year. When you compare the concessions, I mean the gross potential income for this property at 5.285 and compare it to the test, we give a credit there about maybe 85,000. So that in itself does provide, you know, some concessions in that. And then in addition to that, if we look at the original assessment, the vacancies at 13%. Remember, our vacancy number includes concessions, so vacancy and concessions at 13%. That exceeds or even matches what they reported in 2023.
Thank you.
And Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, but Rob, isn't column E1 supposed to be accurate and not, well, we have a higher vacancy and therefore it's no problem? Shouldn't concessions be in E1?
You can, again, it's not, you know, the way and manner in which it's reported, the concessions, again, are all in a lump sum. You know, each lease is different where, you know, there are times that they include the concessions in the first 2 months of the year, and then the preceding years that they'll have it again first 2 months of the year. But when looking and projecting, again, I pointed out that our income relative to what was reported is less in our test column. So I guess in column E1, it's as if they, I guess you could, you know, deduct out the 529, but in addition to that, we're also deducting the 8%. So when we develop the test or do the assessment, we normally do not include the actual concessions that are reported. So that's why the reconstructing does not have that in there.
Rob, what's the actual vacancy of this building?
It was up for contention, 8%, at 10,255 or 2,181 is what I tested.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, again, the original assessment at 3.1 is less than what the, you know, operating history of this property has been. Even with the 10,255 square feet, you'll see in column C, the projected NOI for the property was at least 200,000 more than what the original assessment has projected. Again, the county tested, and, you know, with the 13%, given that the Summit Ridge could possibly have left, we do account for that square footage being vacant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So now we're hearing the county kind of move off of their test column, go back to the original assessment. Despite the test column kind of being held out as better information, we created this. Looking at the test column, correct that vacancy rate to the 13% to reflect that Summit Ridge Energy having vacated in July of 2022. Considering actual concessions at the property gets to a value of $28,765,000. That's lower than the initial assessment. And by the way, actual concessions at this property, we have data going back 8 years. Over the past 8 years, concessions have averaged $590,000 per year. So taking 1 year and taking 10% of it, as Mr. Peralta suggested, doesn't paint an accurate picture of this property. Each year of the past 8, concessions have averaged $590,000 per year. Looking at the reconstructed 2023 column, correct it to the correct vacancy rate and consider actual concessions. We see that value is also lower than the initial assessment. That's $30,933,000. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, it's just among the board. I just will say, you know, again, it's going to be a long month of October here. You know, so the snarly comments are really difficult to listen to. I would assume that Mr. Peralta went back to the original assessment because it's lower than the test. So That being said, where is everybody on this? Mr. Matskin.
I'll take a stab. I heard this concerning concessions and lump sum involved in vacancy and concessions. My understanding always was that the vacancy percentage was generally just that, actually tracking how much space is not producing revenue through rents. Of course, the department's right that concessions oftentimes are experienced or enjoyed by tenants over time. $500,000 concession doesn't mean that in year one they don't pay $500,000 in rent. It could take 5 years to not pay that, or 10, the length of the lease. But when I'm seeing that this is chronic, every year it's a fairly substantial number, as different tenants are enjoying concessions, not paying rent. There's new ones coming in also doing that, and it all still adds up to a goodly amount of money in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. Apparently that's just the way this owner works in order to keep the rent roll up, the vacancy down. So I don't know how, I don't think writing off, decreasing the EGI by $500,000 is correct, but I don't see where it's really lumped into, use the department's word, lumped into the 13% in column D or the 8% in column E1. So I'd like to reduce the EGI by some amount of money that I'm happy to discuss with my colleagues, and adjust the column D NOI and therefore evaluation downward as appropriate. So any reactions, I'd be happy to listen.
All right, well, on that, I guess where I'm kind of at on this, I look at the number in the original assessment and the 13%. I mean, it's 628,000, almost 629,000, which is more than what the appellants got in their performance. So to me, I'm fine with that. I think if anything, the expenses seem a little light, based on the performance of the property in 2023. So I don't know. I'm curious what other folks think on that. Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I'll share what's troubling me, and I really don't know what to do. What's troubling me is the significant difference between E and E1. And, to me, the operating year is supposed to be actually what occurred, and the county reconstructs it. And somehow we jumped up 500,000 in the reconstruction. And I'm not exactly sure what to do, but if the operating year in truth ended up at, 2,736,000 versus an assessment of 3,100,000, and then the test, something's amiss, and I just don't quite know what it is.
Well, part of it, I mean, just if you want to take a look at E2, where E1 doesn't have the 262,405 for the vacant office.
Right.
So if you add that to it, it's not, the disparity is not shouldn't be quite as alarming to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because the county has that, they have it, and the appellant also has the 262,405, because you got to do gross potential on that before you can go take out. So if just leaving all numbers even, get a calculator here. If you have the 2,736,554 plus the vacant square foot of 262,405, and I realize that vacancy and expenses and things like that haven't been taken, it's 2,998, so 3 million. So
see, on the reconstruction though, because I asked what's the vacancy rate, and the vacancy rate, if it's 8%, then that's accurate, but then there's no allowing for concessions.
Oh, no, I understand that, but you're asking why there's such a huge difference. So
Yeah.
part of it, 262,000 has not been included.
Hmm.
You know, so it depended on, you know, where you're going. If you're going to go with the actuals, which I'm not suggesting to do, you got to add that back in.
And if you follow those two columns down to the bottom, you find that the test column actually produces an NOI lower than the E1 reconstructed column. So it becomes yet again a cap rate issue.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. Mr. Penaranda, where are you?
Hi, sorry about that. I got disconnected right before we started our conversation among the board. But yeah, I was looking also at the vacancy that was reconstructed, and I did test using the 13% on the reconstructed column, which is E1, and I came up with a final value by doing that of 37,597,300 with an NOI of 3,094,000. To me, that was a little more fair to, you know, complete and to issue the vacancy and concessions at 13% if we're going to be reconstructing using the vacancy income.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry. So you took the test column, the F?
No, I took the E1 column.
Okay.
And that's to account for this contended tenant that is either there or not there at the time at the date evaluation.
Correct.
Yeah, so I figured.
Okay, so you increase the vacancy and concessions to 13%?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I can live with that.
I can too. That's kind of
That's-
where I was.
Yeah, that's the solution I was looking for, Jose.
I'm glad. Yeah, I looked at all the columns and I thought that was the one that made more sense to use it in this case.
All right, Mr.
Okay.
Penaranda, go ahead.
Sure, I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to 37,597,300, and that's by increasing the vacancy and concessions to 13% on the reconstructed column.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. The assessment has been reduced to 37,597,300 even. Thank you. Okay, same players here. RPC 160330001 at 1501 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property, similar to the last case, primarily I want to focus on the county's 2023 reconstructed column that they provided in column E1. Now, no test was provided for this property, so I'll just primarily focus on this 2023 reconstructed column. Now, looking at E1, we see that first the county can test the vacancy rate at the property based on CoStar. There's a discrepancy between CoStar and what the owner has on their rent roll. For this issue, Rob did reach out and ask if some of the vacant suites listed as vacant on the rent roll were actually sublet. They were not. CoStar appears to mistakenly omit vacant suites 2201, 4400, 4401, and 10,004. Now, Rob and I did inspect this property last August of 2023, and none of these discrepancies were verified or brought up at that time. So the vacant square footage at the property as of the date of value, according to the owner's certified rent roll, was 42,821 square feet. That's on page 78 of the county's submission. This equates to a vacancy rate of 33% as of the date of value. Now, going back to the county's reconstructed column, primary issue here is that it double counts income. We've seen this on prior cases, but I want to kind of go into detail of how exactly it double counts income on that reconstructed column. In total, the county's reconstruction overcounts income by $339,000 by double counting income attributable to suite 4400. Suite 4400 was occupied by a tenant named RMC Research Corp. From January 1st of 2023 until their lease expired on November 30th of 2023. So for 11 months of 2023, a tenant occupied Suite 4400 and paid approximately $340,000 in rent. This 11 months of income was reported by the owner on their I&E, and this amount was copied over to row 1 of the county's reconstruction. So 11 months worth of actual rent that was received for 2023 attributable to Suite 4400 appears on the county's reconstruction on row 1. Then, since the tenant had vacated at the end of November 2023, the suite was of course counted as vacant on the January 1 rent roll for 2024. Since it was vacant, on our analysis, we imputed income as a vacant suite. We imputed a full 12 months of income to that vacant suite 4400. This 12 months of income for the same suite, Suite 4400, was then copied over to the county's reconstruction analysis on row 2. So essentially the county's 2023 reconstruction includes 23 months worth of rent on the same suite, Suite 4400. 11 months that the tenant paid in 2023 that was copied over on row 1, and then a full 12 months that were imputed on the vacant space as it existed on the first of the year. That was imputed on our analysis. So Suite 4400 has 23 months of rent imputed on it. That overstates actual rent attributable to that suite by about $340,000. Next, on row 10 of the county's 2023 reconstruction, you'll notice that no concessions were included. Now, the county used actual rents received, actual operating expenses, did not include actual concessions. Now, the county's vacancy rate that they impute, I checked the guidelines and it does not say that it includes concessions. That vacancy rate is attributable to income not received on actual vacant space at the property. So this property, again, 33% vacant. What the county's reconstruction has done is, if we ignore the double counting of income, essentially it's grossed up income on all of that 33% of vacant space. Then it deducts 28% of that as a guideline vacancy. That's independent of any concessions. Now you can see in 2023, the owner actually incurred $25,000 in concessions. And over the past 4 years, concessions at this property have averaged $228,000 each year. So concessions, the 2023 reconstruction does not include any concessions, does not consider them, despite the property having a documented history of concessions that's averaged $228,000 each year over the past 4. So taken together, the double counting of rent on Suite 4400 and failure to include any consideration of concessions on the 2023 reconstruction results in NOI on that column being overstated by $780,000. If we adjust the NOI by $780,000 to account for the double counting of rent and including average concessions of the past 4 years, the NOI for 2023 reconstruction comes out to $2,005,500. This is a more accurate portrayal of what the property can expect to operate at going forward. We've used actual 2023 income, removed the 11 months of rent the tenant for Suite 4400 paid, since that suite is accounted for on the vacant square footage. And then we also included the average concessions the properties incur. Capitalized at the county's cap rate of 8.23% gets to a final value of $24,367,900. But we're not done yet, because this property again was 33% vacant. So that additional, since the reconstruction only imputes a 28% vacancy, despite imputing income on 33% of the vacant space, we have 5% of NLA that's excess vacancy. So a DFL is required per their guidelines, deducting a DFL with the county's assumptions, 1 year lease up, $90 in TIs. This gets us to a final value based on reconstructing 2023 actuals of $23,227,500. Now this is, again, reflective of the actuals at the property. It takes out the double counting of income for Suite 4400. As it stands on the county's test page, that one suite has 23 months worth of rent attributable to it. We're only looking at 12 months worth of projections, so that's obviously almost a double count level. The reconstruction, again, also doesn't consider concessions. Considering both of those items, applying a DFL for the excess vacancy gets to a final value of $23,227,500. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. Just to give you some background, we did reach out to the appellant, the agent, Mr. Harmon, about the vacant square footage. You'll see on page 11 of 98, the email correspondence in which we asked specifically about these vacant square footages on separate floors. You'll see the comments that Mr. Harmon had stated that floors 2 and 3 are all garage space, and the fitness center is located on the 4th floor, and should also remove the vacant square footage of 4401 with 2,320 square feet from the vacant square feet totals. Actually, I'm sorry, that was my comment. He actually says on page 12 of 98 that floors 2 and 3 are garages. The fitness center is on the 4th, and the conference center is at a neighboring property at 1515 Wilson. So in response to that email, I asked, are you suggesting that any vacant square footage on the 2nd and 3rd floor should be removed from the vacant square footage totals? Because as he suggested, floors 2 and 3 are all garage spaces. And then I also asked about the fitness center, if that had a specific suite that should be allocated with 4401 that corresponded to 2,320 square feet vacant. Today, during the presentation, he says that these spaces are vacant, that we inspected it in prior years. But I mean, I asked specifically about these, vacant square footages. No direct answer was given. I hear today that, that those spaces are vacant, but, I asked and really, to me, it was more argumentative, the response. Are we comparing the current CoStar listing versus when we value the property? As you see in the comments section of our worksheet, I do indicate that 29,371 square feet was vacant per CoStar as of the date of valuation, which was December 6, 2023. So that's where the original assessment comes from. I went through the rent roll, and that's why I asked those questions. When looking at this property, though, the appellant contends that there's an overstating of income. If you look on column E, the NOI that was reported, and that's absent of the vacant square footage income, the appellant suggests that we're double counting the income, I guess, in column or row A1, column E, row A1. If we were double counting that, and we just as a simple test, we divide that figure into half, we come up with a figure about 663,160. If you add that back to column E, the NOI row 19, 2.4, and as a rough estimate, you add 600,000, it comes out to 3 million for a suggested projected NOI for the property, and the county is at 2.5 in an original. So that's why we didn't test for this specific property. If you look on prior years as well, the original assessment is less than all 4 years, that with the exception of most recent year, where it's reporting a significant amount of square feet vacant for the property. So the original assessment again captures the 28% vacancy that we found as CoStar states. we did ask the questions about the spaces, the suggestions that Mr. Harmon pointed out was floors 2 and 3 are garages. And then we had a question about the fitness center square footage. So all in all, you know, what it comes down to in the department's eyes is the NOI. No matter how you get there, we're, you know, potentially 500,000 less than what this property should be projecting in income based on that figure that Mr. Harmon pointed out. An extra 600,000 in income that should be reported in 2023. At this point, we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? Oh, Mr. Matskin.
Thanks. I got two quickies. One for the appellant. Columns G, G1, G2. Those, I want to make sure I understand this. Again, for the appellant, the cap rates down at the bottom, towards the bottom, are your estimated or calculated cap rates, right? For each of those years?
Those are for prior years, yes.
Yeah, but they're yours. They're not the county guideline. Just want to be real clear.
I believe so. I believe G may have been the county's guideline. I don't know if we contested their cap rates that year. I'd have to go back to that appeal to verify.
That's exactly why I was looking for it. But okay, the chances are G1 and G2 are yours or the owners or prior agent, whatever. G would be as well. I want to be clear on that for a different reason. Thanks. For the department, maybe you answered this. Hold on. No, in fact, no, I didn't cross that out. I crossed out I had two questions for you and you answered them both during your presentation. I'm good. Thank you. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions? Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up then?
Yes, again, in this specific situation, the county did not do a test, given that the original NOI is so much less than the previous 3 years of income. When projecting for the most recent 2023, you'll see that column E1, it projects a higher figure. And therefore, we do ask the county, the BOE, to confirm this case based on the information that was provided. Again, with the concessions argument, you'll see that the vacancy of the original assessment at 1.4 eclipses any of the concessions that have been reported. That vacancy isn't, you know, realized or reported. So 1.4 versus the most recent 24,859 square feet. So again, we ask that the board confirm this assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So when you're considering vacancy and collections, remember we're grossing up income and then taking a vacancy rate. So when we look at 2023 actual reported on column E, as Mr. Peralta said, take 600,000 and just add it to there to gross up income. You have to follow that through and then take the vacancy rate also. Once you take the vacancy on that, the NOI on that column decreases to just under $1.7 million. Now, I want to focus on the 2023 reconstruction because it does double count income attributable to Suite 4400. It counts it once with the actual income reported, and then it counts it again as imputed on vacant office. Now, even if we remove all the he said, she said about vacant space, is it garage space, are there suites on that floor, and accept the county's 23% vacancy rate, correcting for that double counting of income and considering concessions gets to a value of $27,594,000. So, you know, look at the reconstruction. It double counts income, doesn't consider concessions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's just among the board. Go ahead, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw a thought out and see if anyone thinks it has merit. The only thing I did is took the assessed value in column D and subtracted the below the line figures in column G2. I ended up at 29,394. 400, and that's the only adjustment that I made.
29 million, but why did you make that adjustment?
I took the below the line figures in column G2 and subtracted them from the assessed value in column D. Because I think the vacancy is over the 28. And that's the only adjustment I
because of
made.
this double counting issue. You're trying to
No,
take that.
no, not because of the double counting, but because the vacancy rate is 32% rather than 28.
Oh, fair enough. Look,
Okay, Mr. Mendez, and then I'll jump in.
Sure. What I did is, the property is above the allotted 28% vacancy rate from the county, and there is a history of concessions. So all I did was take the 24,859 of concessions in column E and applied it to column D, and I came up with a slight reduction. It was 30,547,300.
Okay, I'm just going to say on that, they're already taken off almost $1.5 million. So why are we throwing in another 25,000?
I saw a history of it, and it's below. It's 33% vacant. There's a 20%.
No, I understand that, but they're already giving them credit for almost 1.5 million in that, which is more than what the appellant's got in his column. It's more than anything that's been historically achieved. So I just think that's over.
In that case, I would probably just support the original assessment. Then that's the only adjustment I would make personally.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at this and thought, when you look at the actual test column, or not the test column, I'm sorry, the actual versus the original assessment, I don't have as much angst over this as I have in previous cases. Mr. Harmon's point that, if you're going to just, jump in there and add the additional dollars for the vacant office, then you got to take the 28% off. And then also, the expenses and carry it down. Well, I just took it and took the 28%. I'm down to adding 571 to it. Even if you throw in 100,000 for expenses on that square footage, you're still looking at adding, 400,000 to that test column. So, or not the test, to the actual. So, that puts you at 2.8 and the assessment's at 2.5 NOI. So I don't have a problem with the original assessment myself. Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I pretty much, when I saw this case, I thought all the numbers, like in many other cases, are in favor of the appellant. The original assessment is more than generous, I think. But I also tested the same way as I did the previous case, by increasing the vacancy and concessions on the reconstructed numbers to 28%. And it still comes up to NOI of about 2.5 plus, and that value comes to about 30 million, close to 5. So it's, it's very close. So I'm okay with the original assessment.
Okay, Mr. Yates?
No, I'm fine with column D. I had tried to look at the various issues and do adjustments in the reconstructed, and it just didn't work out. D is a better number than anything I could really come up with.
Okay, Mr. Matskin?
thanks. One thing I need to say, and I might have said it a year or two ago, be careful when you're looking at CoStar, because those numbers are only as good as what the inputter, usually an agent, a real estate agent, sometimes the owner, puts in and when they put it in. And lots of times they forget to announce that something's been leased or something's been vacated. And I gotta go with owners, S apostrophe, signed and confirmed vacancy numbers, which in this case is about 33%. I gotta trust them over real estate agents. Having said that, I'd like very much Jose's approach, but I would have changed it to 28% plus below the line, again, to accommodate for what the owner says on the data value the vacancy rate was, namely 33%. I have not done that number. I've been proven that under pressure. My arithmetic is lacking, but I or somebody more competent can do it if there's a consensus for that.
Okay, well, I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, there's not. So Mr. Lawson, I'm not sure where you are.
Yeah, Jose was using column E1. I was using column D. If you use my thinking and then apply it to column E1, it's still higher than the assessed value in D. So I'm going to be convinced to go ahead with the assessed value.
Okay. Then with that, I'm going to move to accept the county's assessment of $30,849,300. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Yates, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so that is 5-1 without Ken. The county is confirmed at $30,849,300. Thank you. Next case is RPC 160350001 at 1401 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Herman, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property.
Yes, thank you. So the subject property is one of 2 parcels that make up site plan 429. Both parcels were appealed for tax year 2024, but are not both scheduled for this same hearing. Now, in the county's response, they state that an appeal was not received for the other one. We do have a confirmation that we received on that filing, so we'll follow up with the county after the hearing, but just for purposes of today's analysis, both parcels are under appeal. The basis of this appeal, again, it's a site plan. It has office and retail FAR development potential. The basis for the appeal is that a neighboring property that's very comparable sold in November of 2023. That's the Roslyn Gateway property. It's located less than a quarter of a mile away from the subject. It's also has similar entitlements. That property is entitled for office, retail, or multifamily. The board did hear that case earlier this year. We presented evidence from the owner, from the broker, showing that it was a widely marketed arm's length transaction, willing buyer, willing seller. They received 10 bids, went back for best and finals, and negotiated with the top 3, and ultimately selected the best offer that they had received. Now, the Roslyn Gateway, that property sold for 19% less than the county's guideline rates for that property this year. The reduction in value, as we discussed at that hearing for that property, is primarily attributable to a decline in the value of commercial offices, and in turn, the demand for and value of office land with ground floor retail. We see the assessments and we see year-over-year declines for existing office properties. It follows that office land has also decreased. The county's guideline rates have not adjusted in the past several years to take into account any of that. However, this sale of a neighboring property that's very comparable to the subject illustrates that those land rates have actually decreased. We attributed that decline on the Roslyn Gateway sale to the office and retail portions of that property and not the multifamily portion. That was also discussed by the board in determining to reduce the value of that property. That property, if you assign the reduction to the office and retail portion, comes up with a value of $40.90 per square foot. Again, that was part of the discussion, which was approved by the BOE, and that hearing was on August 7th of this year, where that property was reduced based on that fair market sale transaction. Now, if we take that sale of the neighboring property, has similar entitlements, and we apply it to the subject property, we see that the value of this property is $23 million, $23,253,450. Again, the neighboring parcel that is also a part of the site plan is also under appeal. I assume we'll hear that at a future hearing this month. The county in their response contests that it was a November of 2023 sale, and the guidelines had already been set at that point. I guess that's an explanation for why the initial assessment didn't take it into account, but it's not a safe harbor for why we shouldn't consider it today. The date of value is January 1st. all information, including sales that occur before that date of value, should be considered. This is a sale of a very comparable property that's very close to the subject. You know, it's got a great indication of value. The county also contests that it's one sale. More sales are needed. However, you know, there's no other sales that the county provides to support their current rates. So it's a good sale because it is also very comparable to the subject and very close to the subject as well. We simply ask that that sale be considered when considering the assessment on this comparable property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. For this property, the county did note that the sale that Mr. Harmon points out did go before the board. 1616 Fort Myer, it sold for 25 million. At the time of the board hearing, the county wasn't aware or didn't know about this rezoning application that they did file in June of 2023. We do have that information that suggests that this sale is, for redevelopment. As you recall, the board did confer or decrease the valuation for that property to the sales price of 25 million. And the land for the 2024 assessment was only 19,055,800. So in essence, if the county, once the final approvals and everything happen, the price per square foot per GFA would be supported as the county contends for this subject property as well as the other property that sold. So given that at the time of the review, I did not know that the other RPC was being reviewed this year. I would have thought that it would all be in one lump sum economic unit. So therefore, I made that comment that the other parcel wasn't being reviewed. I did learn, however, that the other Aneta is scheduled to appear before the board to present that case. So given that these two properties are I believe, a part of an economic unit, or actually part of the site plan, not an economic unit. Somewhat should be heard together, but given that this property, and we maintain the same sort of defense as far as the other parcel as well, so that shouldn't be a factor in presenting this one here today. So when you look at this property, use the $65 per GFA, and again, the one sale that Mr. Harmon points out is also I spoke in great length with the owner at the time of inspection. And as you recall, also during that case, they had a GSA tenant that was condemning their lease. They hadn't paid the rent for the property, and that to me was a factor in the price as well. And then we toured that property extensively as well. The roof was somewhat in disrepair. It was spongy. It was, a lot of the argument to point to that property as a income producing sale didn't quite match up to the I guess the opinion of the owner at the time. We went in great lengths discussing how the county street ran between the two properties of that property. So that was a big hurdle to suggest that there was some pushback from the county regarding getting the approvals for this 600, I believe, apartments that they propose, and the county has accepted the application. And it actually extended the site plan until 2025. So therefore, given that this property comparable that Mr. Harmon points out, and the county points out as well, we believe that it supports the original assessment. And so we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? Okay, any final comments, Mr. Peralta?
I don't. Thank you.
Okay, any final comments in your minute, Mr. Harmon?
Yes, thank you. So I think, the sale comp I'm using is Roslyn Gateway. I think in the county's response, they were mentioning multiple other buildings, office buildings, and not necessarily the Roslyn Gateway, which is a site plan. Roslyn Gateway is entitled for office, multifamily retail. It's sold for 19% less than the current guideline rates. I think Mr. Peralta was talking about the sale of office buildings that occurred. And the GSA tenant, I'm not sure what building that was, but focusing just on the sale count, the Roslyn Gateway, that's 1901, 1911 Fort Myer Drive. That property sold for 19% lower than the current guideline rates. That sale occurred in November of 2023. We provided evidence showing that it was widely marketed. It was an arm's length transaction, and as such, it should be considered as evidence of fair market value for this property, which is less than a quarter mile away from that sale. We've simply applied the values from that sale comp to this subject property, and that's how we came up with our value. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board. I'll start. To me, the site plan is the site plan. This was a different property when we looked at the one that it's in itself was sold, and I think the board had made a decision to apply that sale price to the value, to the assessment. I think it's a slippery slope for us to be now handpicking and saying, oh, well, based on this sale, we're going to adjust the value of this site plan. On the flip side of it, when the market turns and it starts to get better and, properties are assessed at a site plan, and then properties start selling for more because of the gross potential of it, we're not going to certainly allow the county to come in and go, oh, well, we have them all assessed at site plan, but now we've got a sale that makes it higher, so we got to make it higher. So I think that's a double-edged sword there. My feeling is the value of the site plan is the value of the site plan. So I'm okay with the county, but want to hear what other folks have to say. Mr. Yates. Turn your microphone on, sir.
As Mr. Harmon finished his statement, he said he's basing this on the one sales comp of the one site plan. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can do that.
Yep, I agree. Anybody else? Mr. Penaranda. Turn your microphone on, sir.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I know. I totally agree with everything you said. So I'm okay with the assessment the way it is.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I actually looked at it from the income viewpoint and took column F and I upped the cap rate, and I ended up at 18,027,500. Because I think the cap rate needs to be upped a little bit, and I'm probably alone with that.
Okay, Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, we've had some funky site plans recently, but this one, I would agree that the site plan is the site plan. I don't think one comp will do it. It's a quarter mile away, so I would stick with the original assessment.
All right, Mr. Matzkin, anything different?
No, just remember that the Roslyn Gateway is an ongoing long-term site plan rolling over and possible changes. It's really kind of squirrely. I agree that's something, given there's and I've said this before, so few sales of this sort of property that 6 weeks in advance of the date of value, I think it could be incorporated, but and it's not. But again, that's an odd property, given its long history, and I wouldn't hook anything to that necessarily, even though they're geographically proximate. So I'm in the consensus here.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, briefly.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is, yeah, there are no comps because people, unless they have to, they're not selling, right, because the values have decreased so much. So, I mean, we're in the market and I know what the market is, and the market is closer to what the owner's saying. But in this, I looked at it from the income viewpoint.
Well, to me, that using the income approach for it would be not equalized with the other site plan. So I wouldn't even entertain that. But okay, so based on the consensus here and the discussion, I'm going to move to accept the county's assessment of $37,758,200. Do I have a second? Mr. Mendez, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Opposed?
Yeah.
Thank you. It is 5-1 without Mr. Lawson. The county is confirmed at $37,758,200 even. The fifth case on the agenda is RPC 170130015, 2014th Street North. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So just as a final point on that last case, the county does increase site plan guidelines as sales supported. So not that it's worth anything at this point, but this property, 2014th Street, for this case, I want to focus again on the county's 2023 reconstructed analysis that's provided in column E1 on the test sheet. So here again, the county double counts income on the 2023 reconstructed column for this property in the same way as we saw on the earlier property. First, the county uses income that was reported by the owner for 2023 that was paid by tenants who were only in the building for part of the year for 2023. Those tenants then vacated in 2023, and that income as vacant was then included on the county's reconstructed as well. That double counts the income for those suites. Those suites are Suite 600, which was occupied by GovLution from January 1st of last year until their lease expired at the end of August of 2023. So that's 8 months that that tenant paid rent. During that time, they paid approximately $226,000 in rent. That rent is counted on the 2023 reconstructed column on row 1. Then, since that suite was vacant as of January 1, 2024, we imputed rent on it as a vacant unit in our analysis. The county also grabbed that number and imputed it on the reconstructed column on row 2. Since the county pulled rent for 8 months for Suite 600 and imputed that on row 1 of the reconstructed column, and then went over to the analysis and imputed 12 months as vacant, that essentially counts Suite 600 with 20 months of rent attributable over a 12-month period. So if we're going to focus on the reconstructed column, we need to remove that $226,000 in double count rent. Suite 550, the same situation occurred, but to a lesser extent. That suite was occupied by Sninnerin Tech from January 1st of 2023 until their lease expired at the end of January 2023. During this period, the tenant paid approximately $51,000 in rent. That rent was counted on the 2023 reconstructed column on row 1. Then again, since that suite was vacant as of the date of value for 2024, we imputed rent on it as vacant. The county also pulled that and included it on the reconstructed column on row 2. This effectively imputes 13 months of rent for this suite over a 12-month period. The third suite that has rent double counted on it is the big one. This is the retail tenant at the building. It's Bright Horizons. The reason for the confusion on this one is that Bright Horizons, it's a daycare facility, if you're not familiar. Bright Horizons is listed on the owner's rent roll as an office tenant, and the owner reports the income from this tenant as office income on their I&E. The county counts them as a retail tenant. The owner counts them as an office tenant. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I know one of the properties we toured had a Bright Horizons on the first 2 floors, so ground level and then second floor. So it's kind of, partially retail, partially office. So that's where the confusion comes in. The owner counts it as office on the rent roll and reports the income as office income on their I&E. So when we're looking at the reconstructed column, what the owner reported as office income includes that Bright Horizons 2023 rent of about $550,000 that they paid over 2023. This is included on the county's office rent on the reconstructed column 2023 on row 1. Now, if you continue down the reconstructed column, you'll see that the county also includes rent attributable to Bright Horizons on row 3 as retail income. This effectively imputes 2 years worth of rent on Bright Horizon space over a 12-month projection period. The result is income on the reconstruction attributable to this tenant is overstated by $550,000. So in total, the 2023 reconstructed column double counts income of about $834,000. Now, next issue on this reconstructed, same issue as on the prior cases. The county's analysis fails to include any concessions that have been incurred at this property. You can see on the county's test page that the property incurred concessions of $122,000 in 2023. This is column E, row 10. Looking at the county's reconstruction column, one column over, we see no concessions were included. Now, looking back at the historical average of concessions at the property's average $134,000 in concessions per year over each of the past 4 years. So correcting the county's 2023 reconstructed analysis to not double count income attributable to those 3 suites I discussed and consider actual concessions results in a 2023 reconstructed NOI of $1,825,858. Now, what that's reflective of is that grosses up the income to account for the vacant space at the property. It uses the county's guideline vacancy rate to then reduce part of that income that's been grossed up. This property was 54% vacant as of the date of value. So we've imputed income on an additional 54% of space that will not earn any income. We only backed out 28% of that. So that vacancy and collection loss does not include concessions. It doesn't even fully capture all the income we've grossed up to account for that vacant space. That results in a reduction. It gets to a value of $18.4 million. That's a reduction from the current assessment before any of the high vacancy nature of this property is even considered. This property, again, 54% vacant as of the first of the year. January 1st, 2023, it was 44% vacant. 1 year prior, 35% vacant. A year before that, 39% vacant. So the data shows us that vacancy's been increasing at the property, which if we also look at what the properties reported, the NOI has effectively declined over each of the past 4 years in line with this increase in vacancy. We do have data going back on this property, going back 9 years. Over the past 9 years, this property has never been below 34% vacant and has averaged 42.5% vacant. 9 years, that's a long time. That goes pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, this property was averaging 42% vacant. The county's cap rate analysis only looks at stabilized properties with long-term credit tenants in place, does not make any adjustments for properties with vacancy above market, such as this one, especially chronic issues with vacancy, such as this one. Just to give an example of an adjustment that could be made, Fairfax County would apply a 125 basis point adjustment to the cap rate for this property. Applying that and correcting the double counting of income would get the value to $15,371,000. Just to reiterate, the county's response relies heavily on the reconstructed 2023 analysis they performed. At a minimum, if we're going to reconstruct 2023, let's not double count income on 2 suites. Let's not double count the Bright Horizons income. Please, I understand if there are questions, please feel free to ask them. I'm happy to help. I want to get this right, and as it stands, the 2023 reconstructed analysis just is not right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county.
Thank you. Just to give you a better understanding of why the county is reconstructing the INEs, every year the county asks the owners to fill out these INEs so that we get a better understanding of the income. One of the questions that are asked is, what is the potential income for the vacant space? If the appellant wanted to, I guess, help us, all of us, in actually seeing and showing exactly what this property would achieve, then, as they do in their pro forma, they can kind of help the owner say, this is what the market, would command for these spaces, as they do in every case that it comes before the board. Now, they report the actual income, and then we reconstruct the I&Es to show the board that this is the potential that we see. And oftentimes we use the agent's numbers to give you a better understanding. Here's the projection given the agent's numbers of what they think the property could achieve. Now, here we have Mr. Harmon saying that don't believe the reconstructed. It's too, we're double counting income. So therefore the county tests. So we actually sort of ignore the reconstruction because we want to see, based on the income that we find in the rent roll, based on the information that was provided, what this property could achieve based on what we find and what we determine as the market for this property. So, as you see in columns E1 and compare the gross potential of E1 versus, F, we're almost $1 million apart there. So, yeah, we're about 953,100 to be exact. And so therefore, we still, take this reconstruction as a grain with a grain of salt, knowing that, our test column has more information, has the breakdowns of what we saw as far as the vacant square footage, what we found in the market to be the rents, and then what is the actual vacancy of the property. So, we did adjust to 28%, which the original assessment only captured 25%. And we do see that the original assessment also had more square footage as counted vacant for the property. So there's a lot of moving parts here, so I'll do my best to kind of go through it. Along with that 25%, the county deducted more excess vacancy below the line in the original assessment. So with the 3% extra before cap, moving that 25% vacancy to 28, and then deducting out the excess vacancy below the line, that's where our test came in as far as column F. We made corrections to all that. We did, increase the income based on the most recent 2023 I&E. And we do see that number is supported, the original number is supported, given the change in vacancy. Original assessment had 72,379 square feet vacant. The test has 66,258 square feet vacant. I believe the appellant is using, some BOMA square footage, possibly. I can't speak for it, but I'm not sure where their 69,104 square feet vacant comes from. The rent roll analysis that the county did is on page 6. If there's any questions regarding that, I'm happy to answer. And then looking at the overall per square foot rate for the leases in place, it's on an average of $43.44. So the county in their test is at $42.50, and then the rest of the figures there, the rest of the rents are coincide with what the appellant is showing in their pro forma. So the only question I see is the rent per square foot, and as I mentioned, the average is $43.44, and the county uses $42.50 for the test. So in addition to that, we were taking off 28%. There was some concerns about the concessions that we're not giving concessions. Again, they're reporting 122,000 this year. In previous years, there's only one year that was more than that. And again, they're reporting it with each tenant that signs a lease. It is not customary. Again, like the previous case I saw, that the rent was reduced in lieu of the concession. So when looking at this, we do afford 1.2 million as far as our vacancy is concerned, and it hasn't shown in the previous years. So as far as their total vacancy and concessions, again, they don't report that because I guess they can only report their actual income. But going forward, looking at the expenses, we did see that we overprojected expenses. Well, actually, we were right on. The dollar per square foot figure is somewhat off, I guess, because of whether they count the BOMA square footage that the property states. That's another comment. For the 2022 rent roll, the BOMA square footage, where they believe that space can't be rented, was stated at 6,824 square feet in 2022. And then in the most recent 2023 rent roll, it now moved to 4,315 square feet. So there's a difference there of about 1,500 square feet from one year to the next, in which the county views these rent rolls, and we look at the rent rolls and say, okay, well, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. This unrentable square feet, 6,824 square feet, is now 4,315 square feet this year. So to me, that number changes from here to there, but we're trying our best to account for it. And then in looking at the overall NOI, I put some figures there that although VU is only 25% vacancy, we overstated vacancy by 6,121 square feet and resulted in a greater amount of square feet excess vacancy deduction below the line. The TRIUS test shows an NOI that's 35% less than the reconstructed NOI after the inclusion of vacant income. In addition to that, the 2024 assessment represents a 23% reduction from last year's assessment. So we're accounting for this property even more vacant than it actually is, and we've adjusted that accordingly year over year to account for the most recent INE history. So with that, we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, Mr. Harmon, has any other jurisdiction, to your knowledge, on the income and expense information form require for an owner to predict gross possible rents?
So that's a good question. And no, and I actually spoke with our colleagues with the Maryland's department, and they said that's not a requirement on theirs either. I can pull up a Fairfax form just to confirm, but no, this is only an issue in Arlington County.
Virginia State Code requires that you certify, that the owner certify that the information is true, current, and complete. How can you do that for gross possible rents?
That's exactly the owner's position, and why they don't fill that out is because it's tough to certify, okay, this property, for instance, 54% vacant. How can you say $1 amount is what each suite will lease up for? If you have a 2,000 square foot lease on a 5-year term, it's going to be a different value than a 100,000 square foot lease on a 10-year term. So that's exactly right.
Mr. Matzkin.
I also have a question for the appellant. You had stated that there was double counting a significant amount in two different tenants, and it amounted to about $834,000 worth of excess income, gross potential income. And that, is that reflected? Are you specifically talking about column E1, the reconstructed column? Is that where that shows up clearly?
That's correct. It's row 1 and 2. Row 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, just want to be clear. So in column F, though, I see that those two rows, 1 and 2, office and vacant office, is, and again, I'm just rounding, I didn't do exactly, but is almost $900,000 less than it was in the, what you contend is the overcounted amounts in E1. So look at E1, look at F. And so it seems to me that I'm asking you the question, seems to me the county found their error or an error or who knows, and removed that 800, mid $800,000 figure out to do their test. Did I miss something?
So if you go on down and you correct that, it still comes out to about a $60,000 difference, because the test doesn't consider concessions. So if you look at actual concessions and then include that, it does come out lower. So they make some of it up, but then not all of it. So
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Mr. Peralta, Mr. Penaranda.
Yes, thank you. This was for Mr. Peralta. I was checking the numbers on column D, the original assessment. The vacancy and concessions at 25%, I come up with a different number. It's a little bit higher than what you have. I come up with $1,056,950. Is there a math error there, or just a number that was surrounded by something?
No, are you taking the entire income and
No.
multiply?
I'm taking just the office and the vacant, retail and vacant, and also the management space.
So if you turn to page 7, it gives you a breakdown of exactly what was deducted in that 25%. There was an office portion, there was a vacant square footage portion, there's a management office portion, and then there was a retail portion that was deducted to 25%. And so the total's $1,032,910. Is that not what's shown there?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, when I add up the numbers from the column D, the first four numbers and plus the management space of 49,281, I come up with a number of 4,227,799, and when I take 25% of that, is 1,056,950.
Yeah, on page 7 of 80, you'll see our worksheet that shows the total income of 4,331,98, and then the vacancy collection was $1,032,910. Not sure where that discrepancy comes from.
Let me see. So 4,331,098 times 25. It's even higher, 1,082.
I think it's with the exception of like the percentages, our system kind of calculates it on their own. So 1,282,268 plus 2,256 94. Times 25%. Yeah, I come up with the figure that is reported there, 1032,909.70, and it rounds it up to 1,032,910. So the totals that I use is 1,282,268, 2,256,694, 49,281, and 543,396.
Yeah, I don't know why we're coming up with different numbers. Okay.
Okay. All right, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes. Just get back to my summary sheet. Yeah, again, when reviewing this property, we did find that in the test, it has the most accurate information. We did find that 28% was vacant, we did look at the per square foot rate for the leases in place. Again, it's we're actually using $1 less than was reported, about $1 less. And then we increased the expenses to match what was reported in 2023 I&E. So again, we reduced the amount of excess vacancy based on the excess vacant square footage in the original assessment. So we corrected all the issues that were pertaining to this property. And so we asked that the board confirm this case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So the difficulty, it's a different focus each case. So we have the initial assessment. It uses the incorrect vacancy rate. It uses 25%. It should have been 28%. Then the test column doesn't adequately consider concessions, doesn't gross up operating expenses, doesn't consider the high vacancy nature of the property. Then we also have the 2023 reconstructed column, overstates actual income by double counting 3 different suites, overstates income by about $830,000, doesn't consider concessions, also fails to consider the high vacancy nature of this property. So, issues with all 3 different presentations that we have to contend with. Long story short, this property is 54% vacant. If you correct the 2023 reconstructed column to get rid of the double counting of income, comes up with an NOI of $1,825,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Just among the board. All right, Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, just to say to start off that I think Jose is correct. I did the math as well, and I think I got the same number as far as the vacancy goes.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
I listened different tack. I just listened to the very last, or took to heart the very last part of the appellant's 1 minute, and it appears, even though he didn't say it, that the department really did catch as I'd mentioned in my question, did catch the double counting and adjusted for it in the test. And I'm saying that because, well, what if we then reflected that in the column E1 reconstruction and we get an NOI of 80,000 less than the test in F? So I took it seriously for that moment. I took the appellant's approach seriously. I think we've gone over concessions enough, so I just did not include that in my calculation, just the double counting, and then realized what has already been said, that the numbers overall are better in the test. Got rid of the double counting, increased the operating expenses, made sure that the vacancy reflected the very high vacancy traditionally in this building. So I ended up, except for this, by the way, so I came up with the F1 test being better accounting than the adjusted according to the appellant E1 reconstruction. What I'm not talking about is adjusting D by increasing the vacancy by about the 60,000 or so that Johnny and Jose agree on. And if they're right, then of course I would support taking that off of the vacancy and capping that out and reducing the bottom line on column D. If those guys agree with themselves, I certainly agree with them. We ought to adjust column D downward.
Okay, I don't know what Jose and Johnny's final number is, but I can tell you this is where I was on this. This is a very stable building with chronic vacancy. I believe was stated 54%. I mean, and has this chronic vacancy for, coming up on close to 10 years. So I looked at this and I have to say, I went through and made some adjustments and I ended up with a decrease down to 16 million and change. And what I ended up doing was I took a look at the appellant's G2 pro forma. And I liked it. I think it's in line. I mean, if you look at the NOI at 16,999, I mean, it's in line with what the property has done over the last 3 or 4 years, you know, and it's including in with it the potential rent on the vacant square footage. The only thing I didn't do below the line, or not the cap rate, I went back to the standard cap rate that we had just from an equalization standpoint. And then the below the line, actually the deductions are less than what the county has when you adjust for the first one, not doing 2 years and just dividing that in half and doing a 1 year adjustment there. So when I went through all the math on that, I end up with 16,155,700. You know, I don't know if folks will think that's too aggressive, but I think it's more in line with a very stable, chronically vacant building. It gives you all something to ponder. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mary. And one of the things, again, that's troubling me, and I guess I'm ought to maybe quit talking about it, but the county takes the operating year and then reconstructs it by saying, by basically doing the assessment. But that's not the purpose of the income statement. The income statement is to provide factual income, factual expenses, and not guessing at what it could be if it were fully leased. And so I agree with your analysis. The only thing I would do is I would raise the cap rate.
Right. Well, I think it's such a decrease, but you know, I will say, just to your point about, you know, they are supposed to be looking at potential rent. So I would disagree with your comment there. I don't have a problem with the fact that, you know, owners and appellants don't provide gross potential rent on vacant property. I mean, I totally get they're certifying those forms. They don't need to be there, but, you know, from a standpoint of trying to come up with a value, especially when you're doing deductions for vacancy concessions and below the line for excess vacancy, you certainly got to put a number in there for potential gross rent on the vacant space. So again, I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily have to be on the income statement for me, but it does have to be given some value, because there is value to whatever the vacant space is in the building.
But isn't that what that's what the applicant's pro forma is, G2. That's where they're putting it.
Right. I'm agreeing with you there, but I'm just saying from a standpoint of, you know, you're saying that they're grossing up like on the E1, you know, they are putting that in there because the vacant income is not reported. I mean, they got to put something in there. I mean, the fact that, I mean, I think the appellant made an argument for, you know, double counting the income and the vacancy, you know, because the number is so much higher, you know, than what's ever been achieved on the property. But I mean, it does have to be adjusted for. So I'm agreeing with that. I mean, I think the appellant's number, like I said, to end up with around $1.7 million is really in line with what the property has produced over the last 4 or 5 years. Mr. Metzgen?
Mary, I thought your analysis, looking very closely at G2, made a lot of sense. But then it produces evaluations percentage-wise significantly lower than anything that it's been evaluated before. Having said that, it doesn't mean that those old evaluations are necessarily sacrosanct, and we ought to honor them. But nothing's really happened one way or the other in this building, and yet we're suggesting we reduce the valuation 40–50%. So I'm stuck on the horns of a dilemma. I agree with your approach, but the result seems out of line to me, knowing that last year's evaluation isn't perfect. So what do we do?
No, well, I look at that and think, but if you look at the original assessment, it's going down to 19 million. So there's the bulk of the drop right there. I mean, and even in the test, the county's got it down to 19 million. So, you know, I'm 3 million less than that. But when I look at the original assessment, to have an NOI of $1.9 million, almost 2 million, this building hasn't had that. historically. I mean, I think they'd love to achieve $2 million worth of income.
Yeah,
You know,
good.
and
I'm happy to be convinced.
I'm sorry.
I'm happy to be convinced by your argument. I am.
Yeah.
And that got me a larger way there. Let me get my hand down.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Mendez.
It might be nitpicky, but you could potentially also say the same thing with the expenses. I know in G2 $12 was used, but they've never reached $12. And again, it may be kind of nitpicky, but that's an issue I have.
But the cap rate,
You think that they're a little too high?
Maybe, yeah, maybe by $1.50, but that just
Yeah.
sticks to me.
It's 50 cents.
but we've upped the cap rate for other buildings that are over 50% vacant. So I think that equalizes it, or that I think that renders it not as important.
Right. And I think sometimes you get lost in the, the dollar per square footage versus the numbers. I mean, if you think about it, they, actually, had 1,004,084 and you're talking 1,004,086.
Mhm.
There's not that much different.
Yeah, Johnny, 50 cents has very little impact.
Surprisingly.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's significant. Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I looked at the original assessment and a little bit further than just looking at the NOIs and all that. But I also went down, not as far as you did, but I used the original assessment and I corrected the math because I don't know how the formula is coming up with with Mr. Peralta's form. But when you add up the numbers and take the percentages, I come up with a different number on the vacancy and concessions. And I also took the instead of the 25%, I adjusted to 28%, which to me makes more sense rather than just taking the 25. By taking a 25% vacancy and concessions and doing the same expenses, I come up after the below the line deductions to a final value of 17,492,600.
What was your NOI?
The NOI was 1.828.
I'm with Mary's figure because I think we should adjust the cap rate, but I don't think the consensus is to go there.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of doing that.
Yeah, it's a difference of 1,000,003.
This is Ken. To me, Jose's completely different approach than Mary's incorporates a lot of the results that her approach encounters, but not to such a level that, as I said, made me a little uncomfortable. A huge, huge drop on a very stable building from last year and the year before and the year before. So this approach still is defensible and reasonable, but it gets me to a better number that I feel a little bit more comfortable with.
Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I would support Jose's rationale. I mean, just zooming out a little bit at the beginning, the original assessment is 24, to Ken's point, 24% less than last year. They've got sort of similar NOIs, so I would support Jose's number, the 17 million and change.
Right. Well, the last thing I want is a split vote because then neither one of them happens and it goes back to the 19.3. So I believe I will move over with Mr. Penaranda as well, because I just think it should be lower than what it's assessed at now. I just don't want it to end up a split and it reverts back to the county. Mr. Yates, where are you?
I'm with what Jose came up with
Okay.
because I was trying to run those numbers along that line too, and I like his NOI better.
Okay. All right. Mr. Penaranda.
Sure, I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to 17,492,600, and that's by increasing the vacancy and concessions on the original assessment to 28%.
And correcting the math above.
Yeah, that will correct the math.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay, motion is second by Mr. Mendez. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ken, you are an aye, I assume? Mr. Metzgen?
Yes, aye.
Okay. All right, so that is 5-1 without Mr. Lawson. The assessment is reduced to 17,492,600. Thank you. And
Thank
the
you all.
last case on the agenda is RPC 17002-005 at 1701 Fort Myer Drive. That case has been asked to be withdrawn yesterday. Mr. Peralta, I assume no objection.
No objection.
Okay, I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Lawson, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. The withdrawal is accepted on that. All right, that completes the agenda. Tomorrow, just to make sure that everybody's on the same wavelength here. So the second and third case on the agenda, items BOE number 77 and 72 have been asked to be withdrawn. And also the fifth item on the agenda, case number 208, has asked to be withdrawn. So you have only 3 cases to read for tomorrow.
Which, let me grab the agenda.
Okay, well, I'm going to adjourn and we can do that after, but okay, so we will stand adjourned at 10:46.
Mary, excuse me, I have my hand up. I got something quick
Okay, go ahead.
for the record. Last week, because this is for the record and recorded, I misspoke, and I want to clarify that. As soon as I misspoke, I knew I did, but I'm saving for the untangling for right now. And that, as I mentioned last week, that is recorded, the fair market value, when all things being equal, tend to be the dominant decision maker when evaluating. And I said per statute, and that was wrong. It's per court case, per precedent. And again, since I was on the record being wrong, I want to be on the record being correct. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metzgen. Okay, we will stand adjourned here at 10:47. Reconvene tomorrow morning, Wednesday, October 2nd at 9 a.m. in person for the board members. And that completes it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Need more.
All right, and then Barnes, you wanted